the love chapter of the Bible, and indeed it is, for there is a great description of love given. There it tells us all about how love ought to behave itself. There are a lot of other passages that deal with love. John is called the apostle of love because of some of the things that he wrote. 1 John in particular has a lot to say about love. But I believe that there's no greater love story. No greater love can be found anywhere than the 29th chapter of Genesis and the story of Leah, or of Jacob and of Rachel. And that story begins with Jacob fleeing from his brother Esau. You remember how that Jacob deceived Isaac and received the blessing that ordinarily or rightfully would have been Esau's had Esau not sold his birthright. But upon that deception, Esau is angry. Even though Esau had reached a point where he no longer deserved that blessing, he's angry because his brother had deceived his father, and thus Jacob had to flee from that area. And he's being sought by his brother Esau at this time. Jacob is on his way to Haran, to the house of his mother's brother Laban. Isaac had told him to leave, to go to the land of his own people, to find a wife and not to marry one of the Canaanites. And so he's en route to his mother's brother Laban's home when he stops to rest and slept on a pillow of stones. And that's in Genesis 28, verse 11. And as he slept on that pillow of stones that night, he had a dream. And in that dream, he saw a ladder that extended into heaven, and angels ascending and descending that ladder. And in verse 14, the Bible says, of Genesis 28, the Bible says that the Lord appeared to him and told him, your descendants shall also be like the dust of the earth, and you shall spread out to the west and to the east and to the north and to the south, and in you and in your descendants shall all the families of the earth be blessed. And so we have here a rehearsal of the promise that had been made to Abraham, that had been renewed to Isaac, and now is renewed to Jacob. Jacob being promised that it was through his descendants then that all the families of the earth would be blessed. Jacob continues, comes to the well outside the city, and began to inquire about Laban. He is told that Laban is fine. It was there that he first met Rachel and as she came to water the flocks. Jacob loved Rachel, fell in love with Rachel, worked for Laban for a while. In the course of that, fell in love with Rachel, who was a beautiful woman. And so he made an agreement with Laban. And the agreement was that he would work for him for 7 years and receive Rachel as his wife. That was a common practice in that day, not anything unusual about that, but he made that agreement. Now that's real love. That's real love. Note in verse 20 that it says the 7 years passed as if it were a few days because of the love that he had for Rachel. And we could stop right here and make a lesson of that, because the kind of love that one should have for those with whom they would marry should be that kind of love that will wait. True love, real love, will wait. And if we really love someone, the time will pass quickly so that we can continue that relationship. Real love will wait and will endure. But there was a problem. 7 years are up. Jacob is ready now to receive Rachel as his wife. But Laban had another daughter, Leah. Older daughter, not as pretty as Rachel, not as desirable, but older. And so when Jacob woke up and realized that the wife that he had was not Rachel, but Leah, he was understandably upset. But Laban said, it's not our custom to marry off the younger first, and so because she's older, then she's the one. She perhaps is not as desirable, maybe not as pretty, but she's the one, because that's our custom. And Jacob was willing to accept that on the condition that after working another 7 years that he could have Rachel. And so Laban again agreed that he could have Rachel also as his wife, but that he would work for another 7 years for her hand, which Jacob was perfectly willing to do because, again, of the great love that he had for Rachel. Folks, there's no greater love than that. Here's a man who was willing to work for a man for 14 years in order to have this woman for his wife. There's no greater love than that. And we ought to have that kind of love, certainly, for our mates as well. And so that time was fulfilled. And Jacob has Leah and Rachel both as his wives. Again, a custom of that time that was not uncommon. But there came a problem out of all of this. There were some unhappy circumstances that are a result. Rachel and Leah, through no fault of their own, found themselves in a situation which they could not change nor control. The sister-wife relationship that they had posed a major problem. Leah spent her life pursuing a goal that she could never achieve. She was an unwanted wife. She wasn't loved as much as was Rachel. And I suppose that Jacob must have made that clear somehow along the way, because she knew that he didn't love her as he loved Rachel. Leah gave birth to his children, and with the birth of each child, 6 sons and a daughter, she said, "Surely now my husband will love me." Leah especially desperately wanted Jacob's love, and she was envious of Rachel, because Rachel had the love that she wanted. And as she gave him children, she thought that each time she gave a child to him that he would love her more. Another side lesson here, and that is where love already exists, then children enhance the relationship and causes the love to grow. But if love doesn't already exist, then children simply complicate the matter and usually make matters worse rather than better. And our young people need to realize and understand that having someone's child won't make that someone love them. It only creates more problems. But Rachel had the love of Jacob, but the problem was that she had no children. And so she envied Leah, because Leah was giving him children. Rachel could not, and so the envy on Rachel's part as well. So we have an envious relationship on each side here. Leah envies Rachel because of the love that Jacob had for her. Rachel envies Leah because of the children that she was able to produce for him. They had a problem. Circumstances that they couldn't control, that they had no power to change because of the customs of the time. And so they had two choices. They could either learn to be content and to live with that situation, or they could live miserable and discontented lives. Those are the two choices when we find ourselves in situations over which we have no control and which we can't change. And a lot of people find themselves in similar circumstances. Not the same specific circumstances, certainly, but situations where we have no control, faced with circumstances that we can't do anything about, that we can't change, that we can't undo. And it may be anything from financial problems to problems with our children or friends or loved ones, or illness, or any number of things. There are any number of kinds of things that we find ourselves involved in that are beyond our control. And when that happens, we must become resigned or adjusted to that situation, or destroy ourselves battling the inevitable. Some adjust very well. Some are able to adjust to these circumstances and not have any kind of difficulties. Others allow frustration and unhappiness to destroy them. But I believe that there are some things that can help us to overcome that problem, at least can help us to keep control of our lives. And those are the things that will be the basis of our lesson this morning. Number one is we must learn to lean on a higher power. If we would learn to live with circumstances over which we have no control, we must learn to depend upon a higher power, specifically the power of God. The Bible says that God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in time of trouble. No matter how difficult these circumstances may be, no matter how hard the situation we find ourselves in may become, there is a power upon which we can lean and upon whom we can depend that can help us to deal with those situations. The Hebrew writer says in Hebrews 13 verse 5 that God has said, I will never leave thee, nor will I forsake thee. And so God is always dependable. Everybody else may leave us. We may not have any place else to turn, but God is always that source of strength and courage and help in time of any kind of difficulty. Now, those situations may be very bad, and they may be very serious. But those burdens will not become so heavy as to become unbearable if we allow God to be our strength. 1 Corinthians 10, verse 13, Paul said, there is no temptation or trial that has taken you that you're not be able to bear. But with every trial he will provide also a way of escape. Isaiah 41, verse 10, the prophet said, do not fear, I am with you. Do not anxiously look about you, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. Surely I will help you. In Psalm 55, verse 22, the Bible says, cast your burden upon the Lord, and he will sustain you. And in the New Testament, Peter says, cast all your care upon the Lord, for he careth for you. Casting all your anxieties upon him, for he cares for you. James says, draw near unto God, and he will draw near unto you. God is indeed a friend, as the Bible says, that sticketh closer than a brother. A little boy one time was trying to move a stone out of his path, large stone, larger than he, and he had tried to move that thing. He had tried everything to move that stone. He'd even used the fulcrum, the pry pole. He'd tried everything. He just wasn't big enough to do it. And his daddy came along and he said, son, what's the problem? And he said, well, Dad, I'm trying to move this stone and it can't be done. He said, I just can't do it. And his daddy said, well, son, have you tried everything to move the stone? And he said, yes, I've tried everything. I got me a pole and I tried to pry it out of the way. I've done everything and I can't do it. And Daddy said, there's one thing, son, you haven't done. And the little boy said, what's that, Daddy? And he said, you haven't asked me to help you. And sometimes we find ourselves in situations in difficult circumstances, and we find ourselves not being able to deal with it when we haven't asked God to help us. There's great power in God, and there's great power in our prayer to him as we invoke his help in any kind of situation and problem that we find ourselves in. But there's a second thing that will help us to deal with these unchangeable circumstances, and that is to learn to classify our problems. We need to distinguish between the things that you can change and the things that you can't change. We have to determine those things that we can change or that we can do something about, and those that we can't. And until we do that, we'll always have problems. The little prayer that is used by Alcoholics Anonymous that says, God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things that I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And so we need to learn to classify those problems, and the ones that can be changed, we need the courage to change them. If there's something that we're involved in, some kind of circumstance that we find ourselves in that we can do something about, we must have the courage to do that. But if it's unchangeable, then we have the serenity to accept that and to get on with life, and the wisdom to determine that. Leah and Rachel were in a situation over which they had no control. The customs of the time, the parental arrangements that were made for marriages, they didn't have any control over that. That was the way things were. And we're grateful today that things are not like that in our society and in our culture. We as parents sometimes think it would be better if it were, but it isn't. And we're grateful for that, really. Certainly, they had no control over Jacob's feelings. They had no control over God's choice of allowing Leah to bear children and Rachel not, at least for a time. So you see, these are circumstances that they find themselves in that they can't control. Their sisters, married to the same man, one with children and without love, and one with love and without children, and envious of each other. And so we need to eliminate the needless and pointless anxieties which only add to our problems. One man who had lived a long time and was asked about his longevity said, and I quote, "I've learned to cooperate with the inevitable. Each morning when I get up and go to the window and look out, regardless of what kind of day it is, I say to myself, this is the kind of day I wanted." End quote. Now that kind of philosophy would eliminate a lot of our problems. I don't like the idea that outside, a while ago anyway, it was snowing, and it looked like the weather's going to be bad, and I'm supposed to travel to Oklahoma City this afternoon. I don't like that, but I can't do anything about it. And so I order my life in accordance to that. If it's too bad to go, I won't go. Or whatever the situation is, you see. I don't have any control over that. And so I say to myself, well, I'll live with this however I need to deal with it. And I won't let it get the best of me. I won't let it be a problem to me. And we could eliminate a lot of our problems by doing that. In our hurry and hectic world, we need to accept things as they come. Change the things that we can and live with the things that we can't and be satisfied with them. And so the third thing that will help us is if we live today. We spend a lifetime sometimes planning for tomorrow and worrying about yesterday, and in the process we lose today. The Bible says that today is the day the Lord has made. Rejoice and be glad in it. I can't do anything about yesterday. Probably can't do anything about tomorrow either. Today is the day that the Lord has made. And a lot of people live in absolute misery because they try to cross all the bridges before they come to them. They try to figure everything out, and make plans for everything in their lives, and they're frustrated because sometimes their plans don't work out. Living life in a lump is unbearable. I don't mean that we ought not plan ahead, and I don't mean that we ought not to prepare for tomorrow. I don't mean that at all. But when that becomes our priority so that we lose today, then we've got a problem. I see people sometimes who have quite a bit of this world's goods. And they put it away, and they have all these plans made for the future, and they have that stashed away just in case we need it somewhere down the line. But they're ignoring some of their needs of today. Instead of spending some of that to take care of some of the things that would make their lives better today, they're hoarding it up in case they need it somewhere down the way, and they're losing today. And oftentimes living in misery as a result of it. Looking forward and planning provides incentive, and it moves us to greater accomplishment, but we ought not ever allow it to ruin today's possibilities or keep us from appreciating the blessings of today. Strength for today is all that we need, and there never will be a tomorrow, for tomorrow will prove but another today with its measure of joy and sorrow. And then finally, concentrate on what you have and not what you have not. Rachel had so much for which to be thankful, and yet she obsessed with that which she did not have, children. And she lashed out at Jacob. And she said, "Give me children or I die." And that provoked anger in Jacob and created a problem between them. Leah also had much for which to be thankful, but she felt sorry for herself and failed to realize the great compensation that was given her by God as she bore children to Jacob. You see, different people are blessed in different ways. Different people have different amounts. They're going to have different things, even materially, because of talent or ambition or whatever it may be. Different people are going to have different things materially. So we must learn contentment. Paul had a thorn in the flesh. He had some kind of a problem. Not only that, but he was persecuted a lot as a Christian. And yet, he said, "I've learned in all ways to be content in whatever state I am. Whatever state I am, therewith to be content." Philippians chapter 4, verse 11. Oh, how we need to learn contentment. How we need to learn to concentrate on what we have rather than what we do not have. Rachel was later blessed with children. Her son Joseph became one of the most Christ-like characters in all the Old Testament. She died accomplishing that which she wanted most, bringing forth a son whose name was Benjamin. Leah was blessed with 7 children, one of whom, Judah, was the lineage through which Christ came. So they both were extremely blessed, even though they were in some unhappy circumstances about which they could do nothing. We must remember that whatever the problems, the situations in which we find ourselves, to lean on a higher power, to accept the things that we can't change, to live today and to be concerned with what we have rather than with what we do not have, to learn contentment and thanksgiving. The Bible says that all things work together for good to them that love the Lord and are called according to His purpose. Notice the phrase, "to them that love the Lord and are called according to His purpose." First thing that is important is that one become a Christian, that one make that commitment to God and to Jesus Christ so that He can be there for them to lean upon, and then to make a lifetime commitment to serve Him to the very best of our ability. If we can help you do that this morning, would you come as we stand together and sing the song of invitation?